21-year-old Amanda Siggers wants a career in law enforcement until a man steals her heart.
You could just tell he had life together, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
But her marriage to Cy Ghosh turns into a crash course in criminal behavior.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved.
Police tell her, well, he hasn't done anything illegal yet. There's not much we can do.
And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
Amanda's life is on the line as she tries to shield her family from becoming his victims.
This behavior can't go on forever. Whether it's the victims or it's the perpetrator, something's got to give.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window.
Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker. So it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was gonna call her, but he ended up calling me. And I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. Cy was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is number one. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Cy's mother's name is Lipika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Cy and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, She realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. And she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Cy had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch. And she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Cy's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Cy's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life. And once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over, help her decorate, and I loved doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment, actually. Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying. But somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver. Where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her, now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling you know, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around and Wayne came over that evening and I was cooking. And I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that she was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me, and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because I didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very, very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time, he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About 1.5 years after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when a family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all three of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm making
Hold on.
an arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down! Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Pravosnik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm going to need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now with guns. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
Sorry, I'm getting out of you. Stay on the
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911. I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Cy's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Cy Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, I said, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I knew there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door and I was met by a very kind lady.
I know that she's wounded and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. That's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's gonna be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was, at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children and they needed me and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared. I
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Sy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Sy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Sy is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
The screen flickers to life in the dim glow of a late-night apartment. It's the kind of quiet that feels heavy, almost watchful, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. Somewhere in the city outside, a siren wails and fades, swallowed by the distance. But inside this room, the only sound is the faint hum of a computer, steady, mechanical, indifferent. A cursor blinks. Then, a click. What appears next is not meant to be seen. Not meant to exist, even in the darkest corners of the internet. And yet, within hours, it begins to spread, copied, shared, whispered about in online forums where curiosity often outweighs caution. A title floats above the video, strange and grotesque, almost absurd in its wording. It reads like something designed to shock, to provoke, to dare someone into pressing play. Most people who stumble across it hesitate. Some close the tab immediately, unsettled by the mere suggestion of what might lie inside. But others they watch. And once they do, they can't unsee it. The footage is shaky at times, deliberately framed at others. It doesn't feel accidental. It feels staged. Controlled. Every movement, every pause, every second seems orchestrated not just to document something horrific, but to perform it. To present it. There is a presence behind the camera, unmistakable. Not just a person, but an intention. And that intention is what makes it truly terrifying. Because this isn't just violence. It's a message. Within days, fragments of the video begin circulating across the globe. Online communities argue over its authenticity. Some claim it's fake, an elaborate hoax designed to lure in the gullible. Others insist it's real, pointing to details too precise, too raw to be fabricated. Authorities begin to take notice. So do amateur investigators, ordinary people sitting behind screens, scattered across continents, united by a single, growing obsession, to find the person responsible before he disappears completely. But by the time the world starts paying attention, the man behind the camera is already gone. And what he leaves behind is far more than just a video. He leaves behind a trail. Not a messy one, not the kind born of panic or desperation. No, this trail is deliberate. Calculated. It winds through usernames and fake identities, through old photos and half-forgotten online posts. It hints at someone who doesn't just want to escape, but wants to be followed. Wants to be known. And that's where the fear begins to deepen. Because whoever created that video didn't act on impulse. This wasn't a crime of passion, a sudden eruption of rage. It was something colder. Something patient. Something that had been building, piece by piece, long before anyone ever pressed play. Somewhere, in the quiet corners of the internet, clues had already been left behind. Small things. Easy to dismiss at first. A photograph that didn't quite sit right. A video uploaded months earlier, featuring acts of cruelty that sparked outrage but quickly faded from public attention. A username that kept appearing, like a shadow just out of reach. Each fragment, on its own, seemed insignificant. Together, they told a different story. But no one had put them together in time. Now, as law enforcement agencies scramble to identify the victim, to trace the origin of the footage, to understand what exactly they're dealing with, a chilling realization begins to take shape. This wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the audience. The video wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried in obscure corners where only the most determined would find it. It was placed where it could be discovered, where it would spread, where it would provoke reaction after reaction. Whoever did this wanted attention. Craved it. And not just any attention, but global attention. The kind that turns a name into a headline. The kind that ensures you will never be forgotten. As investigators dig deeper, they begin to uncover a persona carefully crafted, constantly shifting, always just out of reach. A man who had spent years trying to become someone else. Someone famous. Someone admired. Someone seen. But fame had always slipped through his fingers. Until now. Because now, people weren't just seeing him. They were searching for him. And that changes everything. In apartments, offices, and police stations across different countries, screens glow late into the night as people replay the same disturbing footage, frame by frame, hunting for anything: a reflection in a mirror, a piece of furniture, a glimpse of a window that might reveal a location. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, the man at the center of it all is watching too. Watching the reactions. Watching the fear spread. Watching his own story unfold in real time. And perhaps, smiling. Because this is exactly what he wanted. The line between reality and performance begins to blur. Every new discovery feels like stepping deeper into a script that has already been written. A narrative controlled not by investigators, but by the very person they're trying to catch. It raises a question that lingers, uncomfortable and persistent. What if this wasn't just a crime? What if it was a production? And if that's the case, then what comes next? Because stories like this don't end with a single act. They escalate. They evolve. They demand a conclusion. And the man behind the camera, he knows that better than anyone. Somewhere in the world, he is moving. Changing locations. Slipping between identities. Leaving just enough behind to keep the pursuit alive, but never enough to be caught too soon. It becomes a race. Not just against time, but against intention. Because every hour that passes is another opportunity for him to rewrite the narrative, to stay one step ahead, to remain the unseen director of a story that has already gripped the world. And yet, beneath all the layers of manipulation, beneath the calculated spectacle, there is something else. A victim. A real person, whose life has been reduced to fragments of a horrifying video. Whose story is at risk of being overshadowed by the man who took it from him. And as the world becomes increasingly obsessed with finding the perpetrator, there is a quiet, haunting question that lingers in the background. Who was he? Because before the headlines, before the investigation, before the viral spread of something that should never have been shared, there was a life. Ordinary, complex, human. A life that intersected, for one brief and devastating moment, with someone who had been building toward this all along. Someone who didn't just want to kill, but wanted to be seen doing it. As the search intensifies and the pieces begin to fall into place, one thing becomes painfully clear. This story didn't start with the video. It started long before that. And to understand how it ends, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the person who turned his need for attention into something far darker, far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Because monsters like this aren't born in a single moment. They are made. And the signs are almost always there. If you know where to look. Before the world knew the name Luca Magnotta, before headlines reduced him to a symbol of horror and obsession, there was a quieter story unfolding in the background, one that didn't attract attention, one that didn't seem remarkable. It began in small, ordinary spaces. In the kind of neighborhoods where people pass each other without remembering faces, where lives drift alongside one another without ever truly intersecting. He was born Eric Clinton Newman, in Canada, in 1982. Nothing about his early years signaled the scale of what would eventually come. There were no dramatic headlines, no early crimes that drew national concern. But if you look closer, really look, you begin to notice the fractures. The subtle inconsistencies. The sense that something beneath the surface wasn't quite stable. He grew up in an environment that lacked consistency, shaped by instability that often leaves its mark in ways that aren't immediately visible. Relationships in his early life were complicated, sometimes strained, sometimes distant. The kind of upbringing where identity becomes something fluid, something uncertain. And in that uncertainty, a need begins to grow, a need to define oneself, to be seen, to matter. For some, that need manifests in ambition or creativity. For him, it took a different path. As he moved into early adulthood, Eric began to reconstruct himself. Not gradually, but deliberately. Names changed. Appearances shifted. Stories about his past became more elaborate, less tethered to reality. He wasn't just living a life, he was curating one. That's when Luca Magnotta was born. The name carried weight, even if no one recognized it yet. It sounded cinematic, memorable, like it belonged to someone important. And that was the point. Because more than anything else, he wanted to be important. He stepped into the world of modeling, appearing in small shoots that rarely gained traction. The images were polished, carefully posed, but they never quite broke through. There was always something missing, an authenticity that audiences could connect with, perhaps, or maybe just the timing. Whatever the reason, the recognition he craved remained just out of reach. So he pivoted. He entered the adult film industry, a space where visibility comes faster, where anonymity can be shed more easily. Under various aliases, he performed, trying once again to build a presence, to create a version of himself that people would notice. For a time, it worked. His face circulated online. His name, one of many he used, began to appear in forums, in search results, in places where attention flickers briefly before moving on. But fleeting attention wasn't enough. He wanted permanence. And permanence, in the digital age, often comes at a cost. While Luca was crafting his online persona, another story was unfolding thousands of miles away, one that couldn't have been more different in tone, in intention, in direction. It belonged to Jun Lin. Jun Lin grew up in China, in a world defined by structure, by expectations, by the quiet determination of building a future step by step. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself. He was following a path that millions of others have walked: education, opportunity, the hope of something better. He eventually made his way to Montreal, Canada, a city known for its blend of cultures, its vibrant student life, its sense of possibility. For Jun, it represented a new chapter. A chance to explore, to grow, to build connections in a place far from home. Montreal in the spring carries a certain energy. The cold of winter begins to loosen its grip, and the city slowly wakes up. Streets fill with people again, cafes spill out onto sidewalks, and the air feels lighter, filled with the promise of change. For international students like Jun, it's a time of adjustment, of finding balance between studies and the unfamiliar rhythms of a new country. He studied at Concordia University, pursuing engineering. It was demanding work, the kind that requires focus and discipline. But outside of classes, he had a life too: friends, routines, moments of normalcy that make up the fabric of everyday existence. He worked part-time, spent time with classmates, navigated the challenges of living abroad. There was nothing extraordinary about it, and that's exactly what makes it so important to remember. Because before everything that would later define his name, Jun Lin was simply living his life. Two lives, unfolding on separate paths. One driven by a relentless need to be seen. The other grounded in quiet persistence, moving steadily toward a future that felt within reach. They existed in the same city, breathing the same air, walking the same streets. And yet, for a long time, their worlds never touched. Montreal itself became the silent backdrop to both stories. A city of contrasts, where historic architecture stands beside modern glass towers, where languages blend and cultures overlap. It's a place where anonymity is easy, where you can disappear into the crowd if you choose to. For Luca, that anonymity was a tool. For John, it was simply part of the experience. As the weeks passed, Luca's online activity began to shift. His posts became more erratic, more provocative. There were hints, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore, that he was seeking a different kind of attention. Not just admiration, but reaction. Shock. Outrage. He had already tested boundaries before. There were earlier videos, disturbing in their own right, that circulated online, drawing condemnation from those who saw them. Acts that suggested a willingness to cross lines most people wouldn't even approach. Each time, the response fed into something deeper, reinforcing the idea that attention, any attention, was better than being ignored. And the internet, vast and unpredictable, provided exactly what he needed. A stage without limits. A place where identities could be created and discarded at will, where narratives could be shaped, where reality itself could be bent just enough to keep people guessing. Meanwhile, John continued his routine, unaware of the storm quietly building around him. His days were filled with lectures, assignments, conversations with friends. The kind of life that feels ordinary in the moment, but becomes painfully significant in hindsight. There is something unsettling about parallel timelines. The idea that while one person is planning something unimaginable, another is going about their day, completely unaware that their path is about to intersect with something dark. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's quiet. And that quiet is what makes it so real. As May 2012 approached, the distance between these two lives began to shrink. Not in a visible way, not in a way that anyone around them could notice. But in the subtle alignment of circumstances, of choices, of moments that would eventually converge. For Luca, the narrative he had been building was reaching a turning point. The need for attention had grown into something sharper, more urgent. It was no longer enough to suggest, to hint, to provoke from a distance. He needed something undeniable. Something that would force the world to look. For John, it was just another month. Another stretch of days filled with responsibilities and small moments of connection. There was no reason to suspect that anything was about to change. But change was already in motion. Invisible, inevitable. And when it finally came, it wouldn't announce itself with warning signs or dramatic shifts. It would arrive quietly, slipping into place like the final piece of a puzzle that had been forming for years. 2 stories. 2 lives. 1 city. And a collision that would leave a mark far beyond the streets of Montreal, reaching across countries, across screens, across the fragile boundary between reality and the digital world. Because what was about to happen wouldn't stay contained. It couldn't. Not in a world where everything can be recorded, shared, and replayed endlessly. Not in a world where someone like Luca Magnotta understood exactly how to turn a moment into something far more lasting. Something unforgettable. And as the city moved forward, unaware, the stage was set. All that remained was the moment when these 2 paths would finally cross. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. There is a tendency, in stories like this, for the victim to become a shadow. A name mentioned in passing, a face briefly shown before the narrative shifts back to the one who caused the harm. But that imbalance hides something essential, something human. Because before everything that followed, before headlines and investigations and the endless replay of a horrific act, there was a life unfolding in quiet, meaningful ways. The story of John Lynn does not begin with violence. It begins with hope, with distance traveled, with the quiet courage it takes to leave everything familiar behind and start again in a place where even the air feels different. John Lynn was born and raised in China, in a world where expectations were clear and often unspoken. Education mattered. Stability mattered. Progress was not something abstract, it was measured in exams passed, opportunities earned, sacrifices made. For many families, sending a child abroad was both a dream and a risk, a decision that carried pride and anxiety in equal measure. It meant believing in a future that required stepping into the unknown. Those who knew John described him as someone who didn't draw attention to himself in loud or dramatic ways. He was not the kind of person who needed to dominate a room. Instead, he listened. He observed. He built connections slowly, through small gestures and shared moments. There was a steadiness to him, a sense that he understood the long game of life, the idea that meaningful things take time. When he made the decision to study in Canada, it wasn't just about education. It was about possibility. Montreal, with its blend of cultures and languages, offered something different from what he had known. It was a city where identities could expand, where the boundaries of home could stretch to include new experiences, new friendships, new ways of seeing the world. At Concordia University, John pursued engineering, a field that demands precision and patience. The coursework was rigorous, filled with late nights and complex problems that didn't yield easily. But there was satisfaction in that challenge, in the process of learning something difficult and gradually mastering it. For international students, there is always an additional layer, navigating a different language, adapting to unfamiliar systems, carrying the weight of expectations from afar. John managed all of this with a quiet determination. He attended classes, completed assignments, and found ways to balance the academic pressure with the simple need to live. He worked part-time, like many students do, taking on shifts that filled the gaps between lectures and study sessions. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, a way to support himself and build a sense of independence. Outside of his responsibilities, there were moments that defined his days in softer ways. Meals shared with friends, conversations that drifted between languages, laughter that cut through the stress of deadlines. There were routines, walking familiar streets, visiting the same places, recognizing faces that gradually became part of his daily life. These details may seem small, but they are the threads that make a life feel whole. Living far from home changes a person in subtle ways. There is a constant awareness of distance, of time zones that separate you from family, of holidays that feel different when celebrated in a new place. Phone calls become anchors, brief connections that bridge the gap between where you are and where you came from. For John, those connections mattered. They were reminders of why he was there, of the people who believed in him. At the same time, there was a sense of exploration. Montreal offered experiences that were new, sometimes unfamiliar, sometimes exciting. The city's diversity meant that no one stood out for being different. Instead, difference was the norm. For someone like John, that environment allowed a certain freedom, the ability to exist without constant scrutiny, to find his place at his own pace. He was also part of communities that extended beyond the classroom. Like many young people navigating life in a new country, he sought connection through both physical and digital spaces. Online platforms became a way to meet others, to share experiences, to build relationships that might not have formed otherwise. It was a normal part of modern life, a reflection of how the internet has woven itself into the way people interact. There was nothing unusual about this. Nothing that would raise concern. It was simply how people lived, how they connected, how they moved through the world. And that is what makes what follows so difficult to process. Because there is no clear line where normalcy ends and danger begins. No moment where everything shifts in a way that can be easily identified in hindsight. Instead, there is a gradual movement, a series of choices and circumstances that seem ordinary at the time but take on a different weight when viewed through the lens of what is to come. In the days leading up to late May 2012, John's life continued much as it always had. Classes, work, interactions with friends. There were plans, responsibilities, things to look forward to. The future was still open, still full of possibilities that had not yet been defined. Those who knew him did not see someone in distress. They saw someone living his life, navigating the challenges and opportunities of being a student in a foreign country. There were no signs that would suggest he was about to become part of something that would capture global attention. It is easy, after the fact, to search for meaning in every detail. To wonder if there was a moment that could have been different, a choice that might have changed the outcome. But life does not present itself in that way. It moves forward, one day at a time, without revealing what lies ahead. John's story is important not because of how it ended, but because of how it was lived. The effort he put into his studies, the relationships he built, the experiences he gathered in a place far from home, these are the things that define him. They are the reality that existed before everything else overshadowed it. When people leave their home countries to study abroad, they carry more than just luggage. They carry expectations, hopes, and the quiet understanding that they are part of something larger than themselves. They represent their families, their communities, their own aspirations. It is a journey that requires resilience, adaptability, and trust in the idea that the future will be worth the effort. Jun embodied that journey. He was not a symbol, not a headline, not a fragment of a larger narrative. He was a person, a student, a friend, a son. Someone who woke up each day with plans, with responsibilities, with the same mix of routine and uncertainty that defines so many lives. And that is why his story must be told in full, not reduced to the moment when everything changed, but expanded to include the life that came before it. Because when we understand who he was, we begin to see the true weight of what was lost. Not just a life, but a future. Not just a name, but a presence that once moved through the world in quiet, meaningful ways. As the timeline moves closer to the point where his path would intersect with someone else's, it becomes harder to hold on to that sense of normalcy. The knowledge of what is coming casts a shadow over every detail, every moment that once seemed ordinary. But those moments matter. They remind us that behind every case, every investigation, every story that captures public attention, there are real lives at the center of it all. Lives that deserve to be remembered for more than the way they ended. And as we move forward, as the narrative begins to shift toward the events that would bring these two lives together, it is important to carry that understanding with us. Because what happened next did not define Jun Lin. It ended his story. But it does not erase the life he lived before it. There is a moment, in every story like this, where time seems to narrow. The world does not stop, not really, but something about the air shifts, as if events are beginning to move along a path that can no longer be altered. Late May 2012 arrives in Montreal with the quiet warmth of early summer, the kind that softens the edges of the city. People walk a little slower, linger a little longer. Nothing in the rhythm of the streets suggests that something irreversible is about to unfold behind the closed doors of an ordinary apartment. Somewhere in that city, Jun Lin is moving through his day like any other. Messages exchanged. Plans considered. The small, unremarkable decisions that fill the space between waking and sleeping. At some point, those decisions lead him toward an encounter. It is not dramatic in its beginning. There is no immediate sense of danger, no visible warning sign that would signal what lies ahead. Just a meeting arranged, a destination agreed upon, a moment that feels, on the surface, like countless others that have come before. And then there is Luca Magnotta. Inside his apartment, the environment is controlled, almost meticulously so. The curtains drawn just enough. The space arranged with a kind of intention that is difficult to define but impossible to ignore once you know what to look for. There is a stillness there, but it is not peaceful. It is anticipatory. The kind of stillness that exists before something begins. He is not improvising. That is what makes this moment so unsettling. There is no sense of chaos in the preparation, no visible hesitation. Everything about the setting suggests forethought, a plan that has been considered and reconsidered until it reached a point of execution. The camera, positioned deliberately, is not an afterthought. It is part of the design. Because this is not just about what is going to happen. It is about how it will be seen. When Jun arrives, the transition from ordinary to irreversible does not announce itself with a clear boundary. There is no single second that can be isolated as the point of no return. Instead, it unfolds gradually, in a way that feels almost indistinct until it is too late to step back. The apartment becomes a closed world. What happens inside it is hidden from the outside, sealed off from the life of the city continuing just beyond its walls. Cars pass by. People talk. Doors open and close in neighboring units. The normal sounds of existence carry on, unaware of what is taking place just a few feet away. Within that space, the dynamic shifts. Control settles in one direction, absolute and unyielding. The details of what follows are not necessary to describe in full to understand their weight. What matters is the nature of the act itself, the deliberate, calculated way in which one person exerts power over another, reducing a human life to something else entirely. It is not sudden. It is not impulsive. It carries the unmistakable mark of intention. And throughout it all, the camera remains. Its presence transforms the act into something beyond violence. It becomes documentation, performance, a record meant to be replayed. The lens does not look away. It does not hesitate. It captures everything with the same cold consistency, turning a moment of irreversible harm into something that can be shared, distributed, consumed. There is a disturbing clarity in that choice. Because it means that this was never meant to remain private. At some point, the line between reality and narrative dissolves completely. What is happening is real, undeniably so, but it is also being framed, shaped, presented in a way that suggests an audience has already been imagined. Every movement carries that awareness, that sense of being watched even if the watching will only happen later. When the act is over, the silence that follows is different. It is not the quiet of anticipation anymore. It is heavier, final in a way that cannot be undone. But even in that silence, the process does not stop. It continues, methodically, as if following a sequence that has already been mapped out. What happens next extends the violation beyond the moment itself. The human body, once the vessel of a life filled with experiences and connections, is treated not with dignity, but as something to be handled, altered, divided. The act does not end with death, it evolves into something else, something that carries its own kind of horror. And again, there is no haste. Only continuation. The apartment, which once might have been just another living space, becomes something else entirely, a site where the boundaries of humanity have been crossed in ways that are difficult to fully comprehend. Every object within it takes on a different meaning, every surface becomes part of a scene that cannot be erased simply by cleaning or rearranging. Outside, the city remains unchanged. People move through their routines, unaware that a life has ended, unaware that the consequences of what has just occurred are already beginning to ripple outward, even if they cannot yet be seen. At some point, the recording stops. But the intention behind it does not. Because what has been captured is not meant to stay hidden. It is meant to travel, to reach beyond the confines of that apartment and into the wider world. It is meant to provoke, to disturb, to demand attention in the most visceral way possible. And that is where this moment begins to expand beyond itself. Because a single act, no matter how horrific, has a boundary if it remains contained. It becomes a case, an investigation, something that exists within a defined space and time. But when it is recorded, when it is shared, when it is pushed into the digital landscape where it can be accessed and replicated endlessly, that boundary dissolves. The act becomes something else. A signal. A declaration. For the person behind it, this is not just the culmination of a plan. It is the beginning of a new phase, one where the focus shifts from the act itself to its impact. The attention it will generate. The reactions it will provoke. The way it will force people to look, even when they don't want to. And in that shift, the story moves from the private to the public, from the hidden to the unavoidable. But at the center of it all, there is still a single, undeniable truth. A life has been taken. Everything else, the recording, the distribution, the investigation that will follow exists around that fact. It does not replace it. It does not lessen it. It simply adds layers to something that is already profound in its loss. As the hours pass and the first steps of what comes next begin to unfold, the weight of what has happened does not diminish. If anything, it grows, extending outward in ways that cannot yet be fully measured. Because the story is no longer confined to that apartment. It is about to reach the world. And when it does, it will carry with it not just the image of what was done, but the unsettling realization that it was done with purpose, with planning, with the clear intention of being seen. That is what transforms this from an act of violence into something far more complex, far more disturbing. It is not just what happened. It is how and why it was made to be witnessed. And as that realization begins to take hold, The next phase of the story starts to emerge, pulling investigators, strangers, and entire communities into a pursuit that will stretch far beyond the place where it all began. Because once something like this enters the world, it does not stay still. It moves. It spreads. And it demands to be answered. The first sign that something was wrong did not arrive with clarity. It came in fragments, scattered across different places, disconnected from one another in a way that made them easy to dismiss, at least at first. In a city as large and layered as Montreal, unusual things happen every day. Most of them resolve quietly, slipping back into the background without ever becoming more than a passing concern. But this was different. It just didn't look like it yet. At a postal facility, a package moves along a conveyor belt, indistinguishable from the hundreds of others processed that day. Brown paper, neatly sealed, addressed with careful handwriting. There is nothing outwardly alarming about it. No sign that would cause it to be singled out immediately. It is simply one item among many, following a routine path toward its destination. But routine has its limits. When the package is opened, the world shifts. What is found inside does not belong in any normal context. It resists explanation, refuses to be categorized as a mistake or a misunderstanding. There is a moment, a brief, suspended second, where the mind tries to reconcile what it is seeing with what it expects to see. And then that moment breaks, replaced by a realization that is both immediate and deeply unsettling. Authorities are contacted. The response is measured at first, cautious. Situations like this require confirmation, require careful handling. But as more information comes in, as additional packages begin to surface in different locations, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This is not an isolated incident. It is coordinated, intentional. The city begins to feel different, even if most people are not yet aware of why. At the same time, in a residential area, another discovery is made. A suitcase, left near a building, its presence out of place in a way that draws attention. It is not unusual for items to be discarded, especially in a city where people move frequently, where belongings are left behind or thrown away without much thought. But something about this is off. When it is opened, the sense of unease becomes something else entirely. The contents are not just disturbing, they are definitive. They confirm what the earlier discoveries only suggested. There is no longer any doubt that a serious crime has taken place, one that extends beyond a single location, beyond a single moment. The investigation begins to take shape. Police secure the area, their movements deliberate, controlled. The space around the building becomes a point of focus, every detail examined, every potential piece of evidence considered. The ordinary environment, concrete, grass, the quiet presence of nearby apartments, transforms into a scene of significance, each element holding the possibility of an answer. Inside the building, attention turns toward a specific unit. The apartment door, once just another entryway among many, now marks the threshold of something far more consequential. When investigators enter, they are not stepping into a neutral space. They are entering a place where something irreversible has occurred. The air feels different. There are signs, subtle at first, then increasingly clear, that the space has been altered, not just by time, but by action. Surfaces that have been cleaned, but not perfectly. Objects that seem out of place when viewed through the lens of what is now known. The kind of details that might go unnoticed in any other context, but here, take on a different weight. Forensic teams move methodically, documenting everything. Photographs are taken, samples collected, measurements recorded. Each step follows a process designed to preserve the integrity of the scene, to ensure that nothing is lost, nothing overlooked. But even with that structure, there is an undercurrent of urgency. Because this is not just about understanding what happened. It is about finding who is responsible. As investigators piece together the physical evidence, another thread begins to emerge, one that exists outside the apartment, outside the city, in a space that is harder to control. Online, the video has begun to circulate. What started as a whisper in obscure corners of the internet has grown into something more visible, more difficult to contain. People who encounter it react in different ways. Some refuse to believe it is real, clinging to the idea that it must be staged, that something so extreme cannot exist outside of fiction. Others recognize the authenticity almost immediately, pointing to details that cannot be easily dismissed. The connection between the video and the discoveries in Montreal becomes a focal point. Authorities begin to analyze the footage, not for its content alone, but for the clues it might contain. The room visible in the background, the arrangement of objects, the lighting, the angles, everything is scrutinized. The video is no longer just a record of an act. It is a potential map. And yet, it is also a challenge. Because it suggests that the person responsible did not just commit a crime. He documented it. He shared it. He wanted it to be seen. That realization shifts the nature of the investigation. It is no longer confined to physical spaces. It extends into the digital realm, where identities can be hidden, where information can spread faster than it can be controlled. Investigators are not the only ones following this trail. Across different countries, in different time zones, individuals who have never met begin to connect over a shared goal. Online communities form, driven by a mix of curiosity, determination, and a sense that they might be able to contribute in ways that traditional methods cannot. They analyze the video frame by frame, discuss theories, compare notes. Some of their conclusions are speculative, built on incomplete information. Others, however, begin to align with what authorities are uncovering. The line between official investigation and public involvement becomes blurred. Meanwhile, the physical evidence continues to accumulate. Each package, each discovery, adds another layer to the case. The pattern becomes clearer, more defined. This is not random. It follows a sequence, one that suggests planning, foresight, an understanding of how to create impact beyond the immediate act. The choice of recipients, the method of delivery, the timing, all of it points to intention. And that intention is what makes the situation increasingly complex. Because it indicates that the person responsible is not simply trying to avoid capture. He is shaping the narrative. Back at the apartment, investigators work to reconstruct the timeline. When was the space last occupied? Who had access to it? What connections can be drawn between the occupant and the victim? These questions form the backbone of the case, guiding each step forward. The name Jun Lin begins to surface in official reports, in missing person inquiries, in conversations that carry a growing sense of urgency. The process of identification is careful, respectful, but it carries an emotional weight that is impossible to ignore. Behind every piece of evidence is the reality of a life that has been lost, a network of people who are about to receive news that will change everything. At the same time, another name begins to take shape. Luca Magnotta. It does not emerge all at once. It appears gradually, linked to the apartment, to the online activity, to the fragments of identity that begin to align in a way that is too precise to be coincidence. Records are checked. Background information is gathered. The image of a person begins to form, one that connects the physical evidence to the digital trail. And with that connection, the investigation reaches a new level. Because identifying a suspect transforms the case from a search for answers into a pursuit. But even as that shift occurs, there is an unsettling realization. He is no longer there. The apartment, now a focal point of forensic analysis, is also evidence of absence. The person who occupied it, who left behind the traces now being examined so closely, has already moved on. The timeline suggests that he did not wait for discovery. He anticipated it. Which means the investigation is already behind. That understanding brings a different kind of pressure. Every hour matters. Every lead must be followed. Every piece of information must be verified and acted upon quickly. Because the longer he remains unaccounted for, the more distance he can create, the more difficult it becomes to bring the story to its conclusion. Outside, the city continues to move, but the awareness of what has happened begins to spread. News outlets pick up the story, reporting on the discoveries, the investigation, the growing connection to the video that has already begun to circulate online. Public attention intensifies, bringing with it both support and scrutiny. The case is no longer contained. It has become something larger, something that extends beyond Montreal, beyond Canada. And at the center of it all, there is a question that drives everything forward. Where is he? Because until that question is answered, until the person responsible is found, the story remains open, unresolved, carrying a tension that does not ease with time. The discovery phase has revealed the scale of what has happened. Now, the pursuit begins. Once a name enters an investigation, everything changes. The unknown becomes a target, the abstract becomes specific, and the urgency sharpens into direction. When investigators begin to focus on Luca Magnotta, the case shifts from piecing together fragments to pursuing a moving figure, someone who is no longer confined to a single location, someone who has already demonstrated an understanding of how to manipulate both physical and digital spaces. But identifying him does not make him easy to find. If anything, it reveals how carefully he has constructed his disappearance. His history is not linear. It is layered with aliases, shifting identities, and a pattern of reinvention that complicates every attempt to track him. Records lead in multiple directions. Names connect to different places, different timelines, some of them real, others fabricated. It becomes clear that this is not a man who simply reacted to circumstances. He anticipated them. Investigators begin with what they can verify: the apartment, the evidence within it, the connections that tie him to that space. From there, they expand outward: travel records, financial activity, known associates. Each lead offers a possibility, but none provide immediate resolution. Meanwhile, the digital trail grows more complex. Online profiles linked to Magnotta begin to surface, some active, others abandoned. They paint a fragmented picture of someone who has spent years cultivating a presence across multiple platforms. Photographs, videos, posts, each piece contributes to an identity that feels both curated and unstable. There is a sense of performance in everything, as if every aspect of his life has been shaped with an audience in mind. That audience, now global, becomes part of the investigation. In forums and discussion boards, individuals who have followed his online activity long before the crime begin to share information. They recognize patterns, recall earlier content that had raised concerns but never led to action. Among these are videos that depicted acts of cruelty, moments that hinted at a willingness to cross boundaries most people would never approach. At the time, those videos had sparked outrage, but the response had been fragmented, limited to the spaces where they appeared. Now, in the context of what has been discovered, they take on a different significance. They are no longer isolated incidents. They are part of a progression. This realization introduces a troubling question into the investigation. How long has this been building? As authorities work to trace Magnotta's movements, they encounter a series of obstacles that seem almost deliberate. Travel records suggest he left Canada shortly after the crime, but the exact route is unclear. There are indications of multiple destinations, possible stops in different countries, each one adding distance between him and the place where everything began. Interpol becomes involved, transforming the case into an international effort. Alerts are issued, information shared across borders, agencies coordinating in ways that reflect the scale of the situation. This is no longer a local investigation. It is a global pursuit. And yet, despite that reach, he remains just out of sight. There are moments when it seems as though he might be close. A reported sighting. A piece of information that aligns with his known patterns. But each time, the lead either dissolves under scrutiny or arrives too late to act upon. It is like chasing a shadow, visible for an instant, then gone. Part of the difficulty lies in his understanding of attention. Magnotta does not avoid it entirely. In some ways, he seems to invite it, leaving behind traces that keep the pursuit active. It is a dangerous dynamic, one that blurs the line between evasion and performance. Investigators must consider not only where he might go, but how he might want to be seen. This complicates strategy. Because if he is anticipating their moves, if he is aware of the way the investigation is unfolding, then every action taken against him must account for that awareness. It is not just about following evidence. It is about interpreting intention. Back in Montreal, The connection between the physical evidence and the digital trail continues to solidify. Forensic analysis confirms links that cannot be dismissed. The apartment, the video, the packages, all of it converges on the same individual. The case against him, in terms of identification, becomes increasingly strong. But identification is only one part of the process. Apprehension is another challenge entirely. As days turn into weeks, the pressure intensifies. Media coverage expands, bringing the story into homes around the world. The details, as much as can be reported, are shared widely. The name Jun Lin becomes associated with a loss that resonates far beyond those who knew him personally. His family, separated by distance, faces a reality that is both devastating and public, their grief unfolding alongside an investigation that shows no immediate resolution. For investigators, that human element is a constant presence. It is not just about solving a case. It is about providing answers, about ensuring that the person responsible is held accountable. Every delay, every dead end, carries weight. And there are dead ends. Leads that seem promising but lead nowhere. Reports that turn out to be mistaken. Patterns that appear significant but ultimately prove irrelevant. Each one consumes time and resources, adding to the complexity of an already intricate case. At the same time, the online communities continue their efforts. Some of their findings align with official information, reinforcing certain directions. Others diverge, creating noise that must be filtered out. The sheer volume of data becomes both a resource and a challenge. Sorting through it requires careful analysis, distinguishing between what is useful and what is speculative. Despite these difficulties, a picture begins to emerge. Magnotta's movements, while not fully mapped, show a trajectory. He is not moving randomly. There is a pattern, a sequence that suggests intention rather than panic. He selects locations that allow him to blend in, to maintain a level of anonymity while still accessing the resources he needs. There is also an element of familiarity in his choices. Places where he can navigate without drawing attention, where the environment does not challenge his ability to remain unnoticed. This suggests that his escape was not improvised. It was considered, at least to some extent, before the crime was even committed. That realization reinforces a growing understanding within the investigation. This was planned. Not just the act itself, but what came after. The escape, the digital trail, the way the narrative would unfold, all of it reflects a level of foresight that complicates every attempt to bring the situation under control. And yet, no plan is perfect. There are always gaps, moments where something is overlooked, where a detail does not align as intended. Investigators focus on those gaps, searching for the point where his control falters, where the pattern reveals something he did not anticipate. Time becomes a critical factor. The longer he remains free, the greater the risk, not just in terms of evasion, but in terms of what he might do next. The nature of the crime, the deliberate way it was presented, raises concerns that extend beyond a single act. It introduces uncertainty, the possibility that this is not the end of his actions, but part of a larger trajectory. That possibility cannot be ignored. It adds urgency to every decision, every lead pursued, every piece of information analyzed. The investigation is not just reactive. It is proactive, driven by the need to prevent further harm. As the search continues, the distance between investigator and suspect begins to narrow, not in a straightforward line, but through a series of incremental gains. Each piece of verified information reduces the range of possibilities, bringing focus to what was once scattered. And somewhere within that narrowing field, the next step is waiting. The moment when the pattern becomes clear enough, when the gap in his plan is exposed, when the pursuit shifts from searching to finding. But until that moment arrives, the tension remains. A constant, underlying pressure that drives the investigation forward, refusing to settle, refusing to allow the story to remain unresolved. Because somewhere, in a city that has not yet been identified, in a place that still feels out of reach, Luca Magnotta is moving. And the question that defines this phase of the story continues to echo, growing louder with each passing day. How do you catch someone who wants to be seen, but only on his own terms? 4 days, the investigation feels like it is moving through fog. There is motion, there is effort, but clarity remains just out of reach. Leads form and dissolve, patterns emerge and then fracture under scrutiny. The name Luca Magnotta is now known across continents, his face circulating through news broadcasts and online platforms, yet the man himself remains elusive, existing somewhere between confirmed sightings and unanswered questions. But every pursuit reaches a point where the chaos begins to organize itself, where fragments that once seemed disconnected start to align. In this case, that shift does not come from a single dramatic revelation. It comes from accumulation, from the steady pressure of information being gathered, compared, verified. It comes from people, both inside official agencies and outside them, refusing to let the trail go cold. The digital world, which once served as his stage, begins to turn against him. Investigators and online communities alike continue to analyze every piece of content linked to him, every trace of his online presence. Old posts are revisited with new context. Images are examined not just for what they show, but for what they reveal unintentionally: background details, reflections, objects that might indicate location. Timestamps are cross-referenced. Language patterns are studied. Somewhere within that mass of data, a thread tightens. It is not obvious at first. It does not announce itself as the breakthrough. Instead, it appears as a possibility, a detail that seems small enough to overlook but persistent enough to demand attention. Travel patterns begin to make more sense when viewed through a different lens. The sequence of movements, once scattered, starts to suggest direction rather than randomness. Europe. That realization narrows the field significantly. It transforms a global search into a more focused pursuit, allowing agencies to concentrate resources in a specific region. Interpol coordinates with European authorities, sharing intelligence, aligning efforts. The net begins to close, not dramatically, but steadily. At the same time, there is an increasing awareness that Magnotta is not entirely disconnected from the narrative unfolding around him. His history suggests a fixation on media, on recognition, on the way his story is being told. That fixation introduces a critical variable into the investigation. If he is watching, if he is following the coverage, then his behavior may reflect that awareness. And that means he might make a mistake. It is a dangerous assumption, but also a necessary one. Because every plan, no matter how carefully constructed, carries the risk of human error. Fatigue, overconfidence, the need to engage, these are factors that cannot be fully controlled. In Berlin, life continues with its usual rhythm. The city, layered with history and movement, offers anonymity to those who seek it. It is a place where travelers come and go, where blending in is not difficult. For someone trying to disappear, it provides both opportunity and cover. Somewhere within that city, Magnotta has found a temporary refuge. He moves through public spaces without drawing attention, his appearance altered just enough to avoid immediate recognition. But anonymity is not invisibility. It depends on the assumption that no one is looking closely enough. That assumption begins to falter. On an ordinary day, inside an internet cafe, a sequence of events unfolds that will change the trajectory of the case. It does not begin with suspicion. It begins with routine, someone noticing something familiar, something that triggers recognition rather than alarm. A face. A name. The connection is not immediate, but it builds quickly. The images seen on screens, in news reports, in shared posts, align with the person sitting just a few feet away. There is a moment of hesitation, the kind that comes when the mind tries to reconcile possibility with reality. Could it really be him? But the resemblance is too strong to ignore. Authorities are alerted. The response is swift, but controlled. There is no room for error here, no space for hesitation once the decision is made to act. The information is relayed, verified as much as possible within the limited time available. Units are dispatched, moving toward the location with a clarity that has been absent for much of the investigation. Inside the cafe, nothing outwardly changes. People continue their activities, unaware of the shift that is about to occur. Screens glow, conversations continue, the ordinary flow of life persists. And within that flow, Magnotta remains, still operating under the assumption that he is just another face in the crowd. But the distance between him and those searching for him has collapsed. When law enforcement enters, the moment is precise, deliberate. There is no dramatic build-up, no prolonged confrontation. The approach is direct, focused on securing the individual before any attempt to escape can be made. For a brief second, the narrative that he has controlled for so long reaches a point of interruption. He is no longer the one shaping the sequence of events. He is part of it. The arrest is carried out without the chaos that might be expected in such a high-profile case. There is no spectacle in the moment itself, no performance. Just the execution of a process that has been building across weeks, across borders, across countless hours of investigation. And then, it is done. Luca Magnotta is in custody. The impact of that moment extends far beyond the walls of the cafe. News spreads rapidly, confirming what had once seemed uncertain. The search, which had gripped public attention and stretched across continents, has reached its conclusion. But the resolution is not simple. Because capturing him answers one question while raising others. How did he manage to evade detection for as long as he did? What was he thinking during those days on the run? How much of his movement was planned, and how much was improvised? These questions linger, shaping the next phase of the investigation. For those who have followed the case closely, the arrest brings a mixture of relief and unease. Relief that the pursuit has ended, that the person responsible has been found. Unease because the story itself is far from over. There is still the matter of accountability. Still the process of bringing everything that has been uncovered into a space where it can be examined, challenged, understood within the framework of justice. Back in Canada, preparations begin for that next step. Extradition procedures are set in motion, ensuring that Magnotta will be returned to face charges in the country where the crime was committed. The legal process, with all its complexity, begins to take shape. And at the center of it all remains the reality that started this entire sequence. The life of Jun Lin, taken in a way that cannot be undone, now becomes the focus of a different kind of narrative. One that will unfold in courtrooms rather than online spaces, guided by evidence rather than speculation. The breakthrough, in this case, is not just the identification or the arrest. It is the moment when the balance shifts. When the person who sought to control the narrative is placed within a system designed to examine, to question, to hold accountable. For weeks, the story has been driven by pursuit, by the uncertainty of where he might be, what he might do next. Now, that uncertainty begins to settle into something more defined. A process. A path toward resolution. But even as that path becomes clearer, the echoes of what has already happened do not fade. They remain, shaping the way each new development is perceived, reminding everyone involved that this is not just a case to be closed. It is a story that has left a mark. And as the investigation transitions into the legal phase, that mark becomes the foundation for what comes next. Because capturing him was never the end. It was the turning point. The moment when the search for answers gives way to the demand for justice. By the time Luca Magnotta is brought back to Canada, the story has already spread across the world, dissected in headlines, debated in online spaces, replayed in fragments that never should have existed beyond a single moment. But inside the courtroom, the noise fades into something more controlled, more deliberate. Here, the narrative is no longer driven by speculation or the chaotic momentum of the internet. It is shaped by evidence, by procedure, by the slow and methodical process of justice. The courtroom itself feels smaller than expected, almost contained, as if the walls are trying to hold the weight of everything that has led to this point. There is no spectacle in the space, no dramatic staging. Just rows of seats, a bench, the quiet presence of those who have gathered to witness the proceedings. And yet, the gravity of what is about to unfold is unmistakable. Magnotta enters not as the elusive figure who moved across borders and identities, but as a defendant. The transformation is subtle but significant. The control he once exercised over his image, his narrative, is now constrained by the structure of the legal system. Every movement is observed, every expression noted. The attention he once sought is still there, but it is different now. It is no longer admiration or curiosity. It is scrutiny. The charges against him are severe, reflecting the full scope of what has been uncovered. First-degree murder. Offenses related to the treatment of a human body. The distribution of material that documented the crime itself. Each charge carries its own weight, but together, they form a picture that is difficult to reconcile with anything other than deliberate intent. The prosecution begins to lay out its case with precision. Evidence is presented step by step, building a narrative that connects the physical discoveries, the digital trail, and the actions that followed the crime. The apartment in Montreal becomes a focal point, described in detail, its significance reconstructed through forensic analysis. The packages, the locations where they were found, the timing of their delivery, all of it is mapped out in a way that leaves little room for ambiguity. And then there is the video. Its existence cannot be ignored, but its presence in the courtroom is handled with care. It is not shown in full, not replayed as it was online. Instead, it is referenced, contextualized, its role in the case defined without allowing it to dominate the proceedings. Because at the center of this trial is not the spectacle of what was recorded, but the reality of what was done. The name Jun Lin is spoken with a different tone here. Not as a headline, not as part of a larger narrative, but as the person whose life was taken. His story, the one that existed before everything else, is brought into the courtroom through testimony, through the voices of those who knew him, who remember him not as a victim, but as a son, a friend, a student with a future that was abruptly and violently ended. There is a stillness when those moments unfold. It is not the kind of silence that comes from uncertainty, but the kind that comes from recognition. The understanding that behind every piece of evidence, every legal argument, there is a human cost that cannot be measured in terms of procedure alone. The defense, when it presents its case, takes a different approach. It does not deny the sequence of events in the same way one might expect in other trials. Instead, it shifts the focus toward the mental state of the defendant, raising questions about his psychological condition, his capacity to fully comprehend the nature of his actions. Expert witnesses are called, their analyses delving into the complexities of the human mind. Diagnoses are discussed, patterns of behavior examined, histories explored. The argument is not that the acts did not occur, but that the person who committed them may not fit within the framework of full responsibility. It is a strategy that introduces tension into the courtroom. Because it asks those present to consider not just what happened, but why and whether that why alters the way the outcome should be determined. The prosecution responds by reinforcing the evidence of planning, of intention, of actions that suggest awareness rather than confusion. The preparation, the recording, the attempts to evade capture, each element is presented as proof that this was not a moment of lost control, but a sequence of decisions made with purpose. The contrast between these perspectives defines the trial. On one side, a narrative of calculated action. On the other, a question of mental capacity. For the jury, the responsibility is immense. They must navigate these arguments, weigh the evidence, and arrive at a conclusion that will determine the course of a human life. It is not a simple task, not one that allows for easy answers. Days pass, each one adding layers to the case. Testimony continues, evidence accumulates, arguments are refined and reiterated. Outside the courtroom, the world watches, waiting for resolution. Inside, the process remains steady, guided by rules that ensure every aspect is considered. Magnotta himself remains a constant presence throughout, his demeanor observed closely by those around him. There are moments where he appears detached, others where he engages more directly with the proceedings. But whatever his internal state may be, it is ultimately secondary to the evidence that has been presented. When the time comes for closing arguments, the tension reaches its peak. The prosecution summarizes its case, drawing together the threads that have been laid out over the course of the trial. It emphasizes the consistency of the evidence, the clarity of the sequence, the inevitability of the conclusion it is asking the jury to reach. The defense, in turn, reiterates its focus on the psychological dimension, urging the jury to consider the complexities that lie beneath the surface of the actions. And then, The decision moves out of the hands of those who have argued the case and into the hands of those who must decide it. The deliberation is private, contained, but its outcome carries consequences that extend far beyond the room where it takes place. When the verdict is finally delivered, the courtroom shifts again. Guilty. The word lands with a finality that cuts through everything that has come before it. It is not unexpected, given the weight of the evidence, but its impact is no less significant. It marks the conclusion of one phase of the story, the point where uncertainty gives way to determination. For the family of Jun Lin, it is a moment that carries both relief and sorrow. Relief that the person responsible has been held accountable. Sorrow that no verdict, no sentence, can restore what was lost. The sentencing follows, formalizing the consequences of the verdict. Life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. The structure of the punishment reflects the severity of the crime, the need to ensure that the individual who committed it is removed from the possibility of causing further harm. As the proceedings come to an end, the courtroom begins to empty. The intensity that filled the space dissipates, replaced by a quieter sense of closure. But it is not complete closure. Not in the way that might be imagined from the outside. Because while the legal process has reached its conclusion, the effects of what happened continue to exist beyond the confines of the courtroom. For those who followed the case, for those who were directly affected by it, the story does not simply end with a verdict. It changes form. It becomes something that must be carried forward, understood, remembered. And in that transition, the focus begins to shift once more not to the person who committed the crime, but to the broader questions that remain. What does a case like this reveal about the intersection of violence and visibility? About the role of the internet in shaping narratives that extend far beyond the events themselves? About the ways in which attention can be sought, manipulated, and ultimately weaponized? These questions do not have simple answers. But they are part of the legacy of what has taken place. As the courtroom doors close and the legal chapter comes to an end, the story moves into its final phase. One that is less about events and more about meaning. Less about what happened, and more about what it leaves behind. After the verdict is delivered and the courtroom empties, what remains is not silence, but a different kind of presence. It lingers in the spaces left behind, in the conversations that continue long after the legal process has ended, in the quiet moments where people try to make sense of something that resists simple explanation. Cases like this do not conclude in the way stories often do. There is no clean ending, no point where everything neatly resolves. Instead, there is a shift from action to reflection, from pursuit to understanding. The name Jun Lin carries a different weight now. No longer tied to the immediacy of headlines or the urgency of an investigation, it exists in a space that is more personal, more enduring. For his family, the loss is not defined by court decisions or public attention. It is felt in the absence of everyday moments, the calls that will never happen, the milestones that will never be reached, the presence that once filled a space and now leaves it undeniably empty. Grief, in its truest form, does not follow a timeline. It does not align with the pace of news cycles or the structure of legal proceedings. It moves unpredictably, resurfacing in ways that cannot be anticipated. For those closest to Jun, the story does not end with justice being served. It continues, quietly, in the process of remembering who he was beyond the circumstances of his death. Friends recall conversations, shared experiences, the small details that made him who he was. A laugh. A habit. The way he approached challenges with patience and determination. These memories, while deeply personal, form a collective portrait that stands in contrast to the narrative that brought his name into global awareness. It is in these recollections that his life is reclaimed. Not as a victim, but as a person. At the same time, the broader impact of the case begins to take shape. The story of Luca Magnotta does not disappear with his imprisonment. It becomes a point of reference, a case study in the intersection of crime, media, and the digital landscape. Analysts, psychologists, and investigators examine the details, not out of fascination, but out of a need to understand how something like this can happen and how it might be prevented in the future. One of the most unsettling aspects of the case is the role of the internet. The way the crime was documented, shared, and consumed raises questions that extend far beyond a single individual. It challenges assumptions about visibility, about the boundaries between private actions and public exposure. It forces a confrontation with the reality that platforms designed for connection can also be used to amplify harm in ways that are difficult to contain. There is a discomfort in acknowledging this, because it suggests that the environment in which the crime was presented is not separate from everyday life. It is part of it. The same networks that allow people to communicate, to share, to build communities, can also be manipulated to spread something destructive. This duality is not easy to reconcile. It requires a level of awareness that goes beyond passive consumption. It asks individuals to consider their role not as participants in the crime itself, but as part of a system that can either amplify or resist the spread of harmful content. In the aftermath of the case, there is also a renewed focus on the importance of early warning signs. The fragments that, in isolation, might seem insignificant, the disturbing videos, the online behavior that hinted at deeper issues, are re-examined with a sense of urgency. The question is not just why they were overlooked, but how similar patterns might be recognized and addressed in the future. This is not about assigning blame to those who saw something but did not act. It is about understanding the limitations of awareness, the difficulty of distinguishing between what is shocking and what is dangerous. It is about acknowledging that the line between the two is not always clear until it is crossed. For law enforcement and investigative bodies, the case reinforces the need for collaboration. The involvement of international agencies, the contribution of online communities, the integration of digital analysis with traditional investigative methods, all of these elements played a role in bringing the case to its conclusion. It is a reminder that in a world where actions can cross borders instantly, responses must be equally adaptable. But beyond the structural lessons, there is a more human takeaway. The recognition that behind every case, every statistic, every headline, there are lives that cannot be reduced to their final moments. There are stories that deserve to be told in full, not just the parts that capture attention, but the parts that reflect the complexity and value of a person's existence. Jun Lin's story is one of those. It does not belong solely to the moment when it intersected with something tragic. It belongs to the years that came before, to the experiences that shaped him, to the relationships that defined him. Remembering that is not just an act of respect. It is an act of restoration. Because when a life is reduced to the way it ended, something essential is lost. And in telling this story, in examining every detail, there is a responsibility to ensure that loss is not compounded by omission. The case also leaves behind a question that is more difficult to answer. What drives someone to seek attention in the way that Luca Magnotta did? It is not a question that can be resolved with a single explanation. It touches on psychology, on environment, on the complex interplay between identity and recognition. It challenges the idea that extreme actions are always the result of a single factor, instead pointing toward a convergence of influences that are not easily untangled. Understanding that does not excuse what happened. But it does provide a framework for examining how such behavior develops, how it escalates, and how it might be interrupted before it reaches a point of no return. In the end, the story settles into something quieter. The intensity of the investigation fades, the immediacy of the trial recedes, and what remains is a set of reflections that continue to resonate. They do not demand constant attention, but they persist, influencing the way similar cases are viewed, the way conversations about crime and media are conducted. And perhaps that is where the true conclusion lies. Not in the moment of capture or conviction, but in the ongoing impact of what has been learned. The awareness that something like this can happen. The understanding of how it unfolded. The commitment to ensuring that, when possible, the signs are recognized, the responses are swift, and the focus remains where it should be. On the lives that matter. On the people who are more than the circumstances that define them in the public eye. As the story of Jun Lin and Luca Magnotta moves further into the past, it does not disappear. It becomes part of a larger narrative, one that continues to evolve as new cases emerge, as new questions are asked, as the world changes in ways that are both predictable and unforeseen. But at its core, the message remains the same. Attention is powerful. It can build, it can connect, it can illuminate. But in the wrong hands, it can also distort, manipulate, and harm. Recognizing that power and choosing how to engage with it is part of the responsibility that comes with living in a world where every action has the potential to be seen. And every story, no matter how it begins or ends, leaves something behind. The story of Luca Magnotta does not end in the courtroom, nor does it conclude with the closing of legal files or the fading of media attention. It continues in a quieter form, embedded in the way people think about crime, media, and the fragile boundaries between visibility and obscurity in the modern world. What happened in 2012 in Montreal is no longer just a case in criminal history. It has become a reference point, a warning, and in some ways, a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about attention and consumption. In the years that follow, discussions about the case often return to the same central tension: how a single individual managed to transform a private act of violence into something that reached across continents within hours. The mechanism of that spread was not complicated, but it was powerful. It relied on curiosity, on shock, on the instinctive human response to look at what we are told not to look at. And once that threshold is crossed, it becomes very difficult to undo. The digital landscape that carried the video, and the surrounding fragments of the case, does not function as a passive space. It amplifies. It replicates. It removes distance between event and audience. That reality forces a difficult reflection on how information travels in a connected world. The same systems that allow for awareness and accountability can also accelerate harm, turning isolated actions into global phenomena within moments. For those who studied the case professionally, whether in law enforcement, psychology, or media analysis, the focus gradually shifts from the specifics of what happened to the broader conditions that allowed it to unfold in the way it did. The question is no longer only about one individual, but about patterns of behavior, structures of attention, and the vulnerabilities that exist within online ecosystems. The name Jun Lin remains central in this reflection, not as a symbol of the crime itself, but as a reminder of its human cost. Behind every analytical framework, every investigative report, every documentary reconstruction, there is a life that was not defined by its ending. A life filled with ordinary moments, aspirations, relationships, and decisions that carried meaning independent of what would later overshadow them. One of the most lasting impacts of the case is the way it challenges the instinct to separate observer from event. In earlier eras, distance provided a buffer. Information was slower, more contained, easier to contextualize. In the digital age, that buffer is reduced. People encounter events directly, often without mediation, and must decide in real time how to respond. That immediacy changes the nature of engagement. It also raises questions about responsibility, not just of those who create harmful content, but of those who encounter it. The case also becomes part of educational discussions, particularly in fields concerned with criminal behavior and media dynamics. It is examined not for sensational value, but for what it reveals about escalation, identity construction, and the pursuit of recognition. The trajectory of Magnotta's actions is often analyzed as an example of how self-image, online performance, and psychological factors can intersect in ways that produce unpredictable outcomes. Yet even in structured analysis, there is an acknowledgement that no framework can fully contain the human dimension of what occurred. Models can describe patterns, but they cannot fully capture the lived reality of those affected. That limitation is important, because it prevents the case from being reduced entirely to abstraction. For the public, memory of the case tends to surface in waves. It reappears when documentaries are released, when discussions about online safety emerge, or when similar incidents prompt comparison. Each time, there is a renewed attempt to understand not just what happened, but why it resonated so widely. Why it became more than a local crime. Why it entered global consciousness in the way it did. Part of the answer lies in the intersection of visibility and shock. The human mind is drawn to events that disrupt expectation, especially when they are framed within familiar contexts. The Internet, with its constant flow of content, intensifies that response by making such events immediately accessible and endlessly repeatable. What might once have been a brief news report becomes a persistent presence, circulating across platforms and discussions. This creates a feedback loop. Attention generates visibility, visibility generates further attention, and within that cycle, the original event becomes layered with additional meaning, interpretation, and sometimes distortion. Breaking that cycle is difficult once it has begun. The legal resolution of the case provides structure, but not closure in an emotional or cultural sense. The sentencing of life imprisonment with no early parole eligibility establishes accountability within the justice system. It ensures separation from society, but it does not resolve the questions that extend beyond legal boundaries. Those questions persist in quieter ways. They appear in conversations about how to recognize early signs of harmful behavior, in debates about platform responsibility, in efforts to understand how identity is constructed and performed in digital spaces. They also appear in personal reflections, in the discomfort that arises when considering how easily attention can be directed, and how difficult it can be to look away once it is captured. Over time, the intensity of public focus naturally diminishes, but the case does not disappear. It settles into a different role. It becomes part of a collective memory that informs how similar situations are perceived. It influences caution, awareness, and sometimes policy. It remains present not as an active event, but as a reference point embedded in discussions about crime and media. For those directly affected, however, there is no transition into abstraction. The loss remains personal, unchanged by time or analysis. The absence of Jun Lin continues to define the reality of those who knew him, in ways that exist entirely separate from how the world interprets the case. Their experience is not shaped by narrative distance, but by lived memory. And perhaps that is the most important distinction the story leaves behind. Between understanding and experience. Between analysis and loss. Between the way a case is discussed publicly and the way it is carried privately. In the end, the story does not offer resolution in the traditional sense. It offers awareness. It forces a confrontation with the complexity of modern visibility, the consequences of attention, and the responsibility that comes with both seeing and sharing. The final reflection is not about the individual at the center of the crime alone, nor only about the systems that enabled it to be seen. It is about the intersection between them. The space where human behavior and technological amplification meet, and where outcomes can become amplified far beyond their origin. That space still exists. And the lessons drawn from this case continue to circulate within it, shaping how future events are interpreted, discussed, and ultimately understood. Not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what is at stake when attention becomes the most powerful force in the room. There is a final layer to this story that does not belong to the courtroom, the investigation, or even the global attention that once surrounded it. It belongs instead to time itself, to the way events slowly settle into history and lose their immediate intensity without ever fully disappearing. The case of Luca Magnotta has moved into that space now, where it is no longer unfolding, but being remembered, studied, and interpreted from a distance that makes it both clearer and, in some ways, more unsettling. What remains is not the urgency of pursuit or the shock of discovery, but the structure of understanding built afterward. Investigators have long completed their work. The legal system has reached its conclusion. The public has moved on to other stories, other events, other names that briefly dominate attention before fading again. And yet this case continues to resurface, not as something new, but as something unresolved in meaning. Part of that persistence comes from how deeply it is tied to the nature of modern visibility. The actions that defined the case were not only committed, but recorded, circulated, and consumed. That detail alone ensures that it cannot be confined to the past in the way many crimes are. It exists in documentation, in analysis, in fragmented recollections across different platforms and formats. It is no longer just an event, it is a case study in how reality can be transformed when exposed to global attention. For those who examine it academically or professionally, the focus often shifts toward the conditions that allowed it to escalate in the way it did. The psychological dimensions are considered alongside the technological environment in which the events were made visible. Identity construction, performance, and the pursuit of recognition are discussed not as abstract concepts, but as interacting forces that can shape real outcomes in unpredictable ways. At the center of all of these discussions remains the life of Jun Lin. Over time, there is an effort to ensure that his presence in the narrative is not reduced to the circumstances of his death. His identity as a student, a son, a friend becomes increasingly important in how the case is framed in reflective contexts. This shift is not immediate. It develops gradually, as those who engage with the story recognize the importance of restoring humanity to what was overshadowed by spectacle. There is also a broader cultural shift that emerges from cases like this. A growing awareness that attention itself can be a force with consequences, not just a passive response. The way information is shared, amplified, and consumed becomes part of the ethical landscape. People begin to question not only what they are seeing, but how and why they are seeing it, and what role their engagement plays in sustaining its visibility. This awareness does not eliminate curiosity, but it complicates it. It introduces hesitation where there was once immediacy. It creates space for reflection in moments that might otherwise be driven purely by reaction. That change is subtle, but significant, and it extends beyond this case into the broader digital environment. Over time, the figure of Luca Magnotta becomes less about presence and more about reference. His actions are no longer unfolding, but analyzed as part of a larger pattern of behavior that intersects with media dynamics. In psychological discussions, he is sometimes examined in terms of identity fragmentation and the relationship between self-perception and external validation. In media studies, the case is referenced when discussing the speed and scale at which content can spread in networked environments. But none of these frameworks fully contain the emotional reality of what occurred. They can describe mechanisms, patterns, and influences, but they cannot replace the lived impact on those directly affected. That separation between analysis and experience remains absolute. For the public, memory of the case appears intermittently, often triggered by new documentaries, discussions about internet culture, or renewed interest in high-profile criminal cases. Each reappearance brings with it a temporary resurgence of attention, followed again by fading awareness. This cycle reflects a broader pattern in how digital societies process extreme events, intense focus followed by gradual dissipation, with traces remaining embedded in collective memory. What distinguishes this case from many others is not only its severity, but the way it exposed the intersection of personal action and global visibility. It demonstrated how quickly boundaries can collapse between private acts and public consumption when mediated through digital platforms. That realization continues to influence conversations about responsibility, ethics, and the structure of online spaces. There is also an ongoing recognition that systems alone cannot account for every outcome. While platforms, laws, and policies play a role in shaping environments, individual behavior remains unpredictable. The case reinforces the idea that prevention is not solely a matter of structure, but also of awareness, interpretation, and timely response. In reflecting on everything that unfolded, there is a tendency to search for conclusions that feel complete. But the reality is more fragmented. Some questions find answers in courtrooms and investigations. Others remain open, not because they are ignored, but because they are part of larger human complexities that resist final resolution. The story ultimately settles into a form that is less about resolution and more about understanding. It becomes a reference point for how attention, identity, and action can intersect in ways that produce consequences far beyond their origin. It also becomes a reminder of the responsibility that comes with visibility, both for those who create content and those who encounter it. And beneath all of that remains a quieter truth that no analysis can replace. A life was lived before it was interrupted. A person existed beyond the moment that brought global attention. That reality does not change, regardless of how the story is told, studied, or remembered. In the end, what lingers is not just the case itself, but the awareness it leaves behind. An awareness of how fragile the boundary is between ordinary life and extraordinary events. Between being unseen and being watched. Between existence as a private individual and existence as part of a global narrative. That awareness does not fade easily. It becomes part of how the world is now understood. And in that sense, the story continues, not in events, but in perception. There is a final way to understand a case like this, and it does not come from investigation files, courtroom transcripts, or media coverage. It comes from distance. The distance of time, of perspective, of everything that follows after the world has already decided to move on. In that distance, the story of Luca Magnotta no longer feels like an unfolding sequence of events. It becomes something more static, like a fixed point that people return to when trying to understand the extremes of human behavior in a digital age. What remains after all the noise has faded is not just the memory of what happened, but the structure of how it happened. A life shaped by visibility, a crime shaped by performance, and a global response shaped by the speed of information. These three elements do not exist separately in the public understanding of the case. They are intertwined, each one influencing the other, each one revealing something about the environment in which it unfolded. The figure of Luca Magnotta is often discussed now in terms that extend beyond the specifics of the crime itself. Analysts and commentators return to the idea of constructed identity, the way a person can present multiple versions of themselves across different platforms and contexts. In his case, that construction was not incidental. It was central. It shaped how he was perceived before the crime, how he operated during its commission, and how the narrative spread afterward. But even that analytical framing has limits. It can describe behavior, but it cannot fully explain intent. It can map patterns, but it cannot reach the internal logic that guided those choices. And so the case remains partially unresolved in a different sense, not legally, but psychologically. For Jun Lin, the legacy of the case exists in a very different space. It is carried not through analysis, but through memory. Over time, there has been a conscious effort in many discussions to restore his identity beyond the circumstances that brought his name into global awareness. He is remembered as a student who had built a life far from home, someone navigating the complexities of study, work, and adaptation in a new country. That reality is not overshadowed in the personal sense, even if it is often overshadowed in public discourse. This separation between public narrative and personal memory is one of the most important aspects of the aftermath. In public spaces, the case becomes a reference point for broader discussions about media, crime, and digital culture. In private spaces, it remains something entirely different, a loss that cannot be translated into analysis or reduced to conclusions. As years pass, the intensity of the case in public attention diminishes, but it does not disappear. It resurfaces periodically, often when new conversations emerge about online platforms, content moderation, or the psychological impact of digital visibility. Each time it returns, it carries with it a reminder of how quickly attention can amplify events beyond their original context. In academic and professional settings, the case continues to be examined not for its sensational aspects, but for what it reveals about systems of communication. The speed at which information traveled, the way audiences engaged with it, and the difficulty of controlling content once it enters a global network all remain relevant. These discussions are not about the individuals involved alone, but about the environment that made such amplification possible. There is also a growing recognition that cases like this influence how future incidents are interpreted. They create frameworks of understanding that shape response patterns, both official and public. When similar situations arise, they are often viewed through the lens of previous experiences, which can be both helpful and limiting. Helpful, because it provides reference points. Limiting, because it can lead to assumptions that do not always fit new circumstances. In this way, the case continues to exist as part of a larger evolving conversation about technology, behavior, and responsibility. It is no longer confined to its own timeline. It has become part of a broader historical context that informs how society understands the relationship between individual actions and collective perception. But even within that broader context, there is a boundary that remains important to acknowledge. No amount of analysis, discussion, or interpretation can fully contain the human reality at the center of it. There are experiences that exist outside of frameworks, outside of systems, outside of the ways in which events are processed publicly. That is where the most important distinction lies. The difference between understanding a case and understanding a life. The case of Luca Magnotta is often revisited because it sits at the intersection of many modern concerns: identity, attention, media, and violence. It is used to explore how these forces interact, how they can escalate, and how they can produce outcomes that are difficult to predict or contain. But within that exploration, there is always a need to return to the human dimension that anchors it. Because without that anchor, the story becomes purely abstract. And abstraction, while useful for analysis, risks removing the very thing that gives the case its weight. In reflecting on everything that unfolded, there is no final resolution that fully satisfies every perspective. Legal systems provide closure in one form, but not in others. Academic analysis provides understanding in one dimension, but not emotional resolution. Public memory provides recognition, but often in fragmented form. What remains is a layered understanding. One that acknowledges complexity without simplifying it. One that recognizes the limits of interpretation. One that accepts that some aspects of human behavior resist complete explanation. And within that understanding, the story settles not as an ending, but as a point of reflection. A reminder that behind every case that enters global attention, there are lives that existed before it, and consequences that continue long after it fades. And that awareness, once formed, does not easily disappear. There is a final perspective on the case of Luca Magnotta that does not belong to courts, documentaries, or academic analysis. It belongs to the way a story continues to exist after it has already been fully told. Not as new information, not as unfolding events, but as a lingering structure in collective memory, reshaped each time it is revisited. Over a decade has passed since the events in Montreal, yet the case still surfaces whenever conversations turn toward the boundaries of online behavior, attention, and violence. What time changes is not the facts of the case, but the emotional immediacy surrounding them. The urgency that once defined the investigation has faded, replaced by reflection. The pursuit is over. The trial is complete. The legal system has delivered its judgment. And yet, the questions the case raised continue to circulate, because they were never questions about a single moment alone. They were questions about systems, about environments, about human behavior under conditions that are increasingly shaped by digital visibility. In that space of reflection, the name Jun Lin takes on a different kind of permanence. Not as part of a narrative defined by its ending, but as a reminder of a life that existed independently of it. Over time, there has been a gradual shift in how his presence is acknowledged in discussions about the case. Less emphasis is placed on the circumstances of his death, and more on the recognition that he was a person with a trajectory, a future that extended beyond what history records. This shift is subtle, but important. It reflects an effort to resist reducing individuals to the events that brought their names into public awareness. It acknowledges that while certain cases enter global consciousness through moments of tragedy, the people involved are not defined by those moments alone. Meanwhile, the figure of Luca Magnotta remains part of ongoing analysis, not as a living presence, but as a subject of study. His actions are examined in relation to identity construction, media interaction, and psychological motivation. Researchers and commentators return to the case not because it offers simple answers, but because it exposes complexity that resists easy categorization. One of the enduring aspects of the case is how it demonstrates the acceleration of visibility in the digital age. Information that once would have remained local or contained can now spread globally within hours. That transformation has changed not only how events are reported, but how they are experienced. Audiences are no longer distant observers, they are immediate participants in the circulation of information, even when they are not directly involved. This creates a tension that continues to define modern media environments. The same systems that allow for awareness and accountability also enable amplification that can extend far beyond the original context of an event. That duality is not unique to this case, but this case made it unmistakably visible. In the years following the trial, the story has been revisited through documentaries, academic papers, and public discussions. Each retelling emphasizes different aspects: psychological interpretation, technological influence, investigative coordination, or media ethics. Yet none of these perspectives fully encompass the totality of what occurred. They each illuminate part of the structure, but not the whole experience. What remains consistent across all interpretations is the recognition that the case exists at the intersection of individual behavior and collective systems. It is not solely about one person's actions, nor solely about the platforms that carried them. It is about the interaction between intent and infrastructure, between personal decisions and global reach. This is where the case continues to hold relevance, not as a static historical event, but as a reference point for ongoing discussions about responsibility in digital environments. It challenges assumptions about how content spreads, how audiences engage, and how quickly narratives can form around extreme events. But even within these broader discussions, there is always a return to the human core of the story. Because systems, however complex, are ultimately shaped by people. And the consequences of those systems are experienced by people as well. That is why the case cannot be fully separated from memory. It persists not because of its notoriety, but because of what it reveals about vulnerability, attention, and the speed at which meaning can be constructed and distributed in a connected world. Over time, the intensity of public focus fades, but the underlying lessons remain embedded in how similar events are understood. Each new case that emerges in the digital space is, in some way, interpreted through the lens of what has come before. The Magnotta case is part of that lens now, influencing perception even when it is not explicitly referenced. And yet, despite all analysis, there is an irreducible element that remains outside interpretation. The lived reality of those directly affected cannot be fully translated into frameworks or theories. It exists in a separate dimension of experience, one that does not diminish with explanation. In the end, the story settles into a form that is neither beginning nor conclusion. It is a point of reference, a structure that continues to inform how the world understands the relationship between visibility and consequence. The case does not evolve anymore, but its meaning does. And that meaning is shaped not only by what happened, but by how it continues to be remembered, discussed, and understood across time. Because some stories do not end when the events conclude. They continue as questions. And those questions remain open, even when everything else has been decided.